Pull a can of coconut milk out of the pantry right now and look at the lining inside the lid, if it's even visible under the seam. That thin plastic coating is doing a job the ingredient list on the outside never mentions. Canned coconut milk sits in that can for months, sometimes over a year, and it's acidic and it's mostly fat, which happens to be the exact combination that pulls chemicals out of a can lining fastest. A 2016 testing study on food can linings found bisphenol A-based epoxy resin in roughly 85% of the can bodies it tested, and coconut milk products were flagged as among the most likely to carry it, because fat absorbs what water rinses away. A carton doesn't have that problem. A carton never will. That's the hidden split running underneath almost every brand on this list. The difference between what's printed on the front of the package and what's actually leaching into the product behind it. Can by can, shelf month by shelf month. It's easy to assume that if a can sits next to the organic produce, gets marketed on words like pure and traditional, and costs $1 or $2 more than the store brand next to it, whatever's inside earns that price tag through safety. That assumption is exactly what a can relies on. Nobody's reading a can lining before checkout. Nobody's cross-referencing an emulsifier against a mouse study in the middle of the aisle. The entire coconut milk category gets to coast on the reputation of coconut itself, a whole, unprocessed food that genuinely is good for people, while the processing, the packaging, and the additive blend riding along inside the can quietly do their own thing, mostly unexamined, right up until someone actually turns the can around and reads past the first 2 lines. 9 brands are coming up, ranked from the smaller, real problem up to the one sitting in more kitchens across the country than almost anything else on this list, with a bigger problem than its reputation lets on. Along the way, one of the internet's favorite claims about that #1 brand is getting corrected on the record, because it turns out a lot of people have been repeating something that simply isn't true. After the 9, 2 brands that actually hold up when the ingredient panel gets read all the way through instead of just the front of the package. Let's start with number 9. Number 9, Goya coconut milk. Flip the can over and 2 ingredients are worth stopping on. The first is polysorbate 60, an emulsifier whose entire job is keeping the coconut fat from separating from the water inside the can. Polysorbate 60 itself hasn't been studied as directly as its close chemical relative, polysorbate 80, but they're built the same way and do the same job in a can, and polysorbate 80 has been studied. A 2015 paper published in the journal Nature found that dietary emulsifiers, polysorbate 80 among them, altered the gut bacteria of mice enough to trigger low-grade inflammation, colitis, and metabolic syndrome. That's animal research, not proof of what happens in a human gut, but it's the closest the science gets to explaining why an additive whose only job is keep the fat mixed in ends up flagged on a list like this one. The second ingredient is guar gum, a thickener pulled from guar beans. On its own, that's a common additive generally recognized as safe. It turns up in ice cream, salad dressing, gluten-free bread, half the shelf-stable aisle. It also shows up 4 more times before this countdown is over, attached to a more specific concern each time, so keep it in the back of the mind. Then there's the can itself. Goya was one of 4 brands named in that same 2016 can lining study for testing positive for BPA migration, bisphenol A, the plasticizer linked to hormone disruption and, in various studies, to insulin resistance and thyroid interference. It isn't banned, it's legal, at whatever concentration ends up in the can. It's also completely absent from the 2 brands closing out this list, which says something about what's actually necessary to package coconut milk safely versus what's just cheaper to manufacture with. Bisphenol A works by mimicking estrogen closely enough to interfere with the body's own hormone signaling, which is the actual mechanism behind the insulin resistance and thyroid research tied to it, not just a vague, chemical therefore bad label with nothing under it. It's a slow, cumulative exposure question, not a single can emergency, which is exactly why it's easy to wave off and exactly why it adds up over years of the same can, showing up in the same cart. Number 8, Thai Kitchen coconut milk. Thai Kitchen's regular non-organic can made that same BPA list too. Same 2016 testing, same finding, same plasticizer sitting in the same fatty acidic product for months at a stretch. Reaching for a bigger, more familiar name than Goya doesn't automatically get away from what showed up in Goya's can. Regular Thai Kitchen also lists guar gum on its ingredient panel, the same thickener flagged a moment ago. It isn't unique to this can either. By the end of this list, 3 more brands will list the same additive, which says less about any one manufacturer trying to cut a corner and more about how much of the industry reaches for the same handful of cheap thickeners once a product has to survive months on a truck and a shelf instead of getting used fresh. And before going any further down this list, there's a labeling rule worth knowing because it comes back up more than once. The FDA requires any sulfite-based preservative to be named specifically once it crosses 10 parts per million in a finished food, not just lumped under a vague "contains sulfites" line. That rule exists because the agency is aware of deaths among sulfite-sensitive asthmatics. Sulfites were banned outright on raw fruits and vegetables back in 1986, after exactly that kind of reaction. This isn't a claim about what's specifically sitting in this particular can. It's the rule that makes sulfites worth actually checking for on any shelf-stable or imported product, coconut milk very much included, because the ingredient can be present, disclosed, and technically legal, and still catch someone off guard who's never reacted to it before. Number 7. A taste of Thai coconut milk, specifically the light, or slim, can. There's no hidden contaminant to report on this one specifically, no independent lab result naming this product by name, and inventing one just to keep the outrage going would defeat the entire point of a list like this. What's worth saying is simpler, and it's really just arithmetic. Light coconut milk means more water and less coconut fat in every can, by definition. That sounds like a win if the goal is fewer calories. But the entire reason coconut milk shows up in the health food aisle in the first place is its fat content, specifically the lauric acid and medium-chain triglycerides people are buying it for. Dilute the can, and the reason for picking it up gets diluted right along with it. That's coconut milk pricing on a thinner, waterier version of the product actually being asked for, and the can doesn't advertise that trade-off anywhere near as loudly as it advertises the word light. It's also, like several brands on this list, a Thai import, which doesn't make it guilty of anything specific on its own, but does mean the same sulfite disclosure rule from a minute ago is worth applying here too, right alongside everything else on the label, the next time this can is actually in a hand at the store. It's a pattern that shows up well outside coconut milk too. Light and light labeling exists across dozens of grocery categories, specifically because less of the thing being paid for doesn't sell as well as the word light does on its own. And coconut milk turns out to be an unusually literal example of that trade, since the fat isn't a flaw being trimmed away here. It's the entire point of the product in the first place. Number 6. Silk coconut milk, the carton in the refrigerated aisle. Silk's ingredient panel reads almost nothing like the cans already covered. Filtered water comes first, then gellan gum and locust bean gum as thickeners, and in older formulations, carrageenan, a thickener pulled from red seaweed that's been used in processed foods for decades. Carrageenan is the one worth pausing on. A 2007 study published in the American Journal of Physiology found that food-grade carrageenan triggered an inflammatory response in human colonic cells, activating a pathway tied to gut inflammation markers. It isn't uncontested. A couple of later studies, including one small clinical trial in patients with quiet ulcerative colitis, didn't find the same effect, so this isn't settled science in either direction. But it's a real, peer-reviewed, published finding, specifically about the additive sitting in this carton. Carrageenan sits in an unusual regulatory spot. The FDA still lists it as generally recognized as safe, and it's been used in processed food since long before either of these studies existed. But generally recognized as safe is a regulatory status, not a research verdict that gets automatically refreshed every time a new study comes out. It's closer to a grandfather clause than an active, ongoing review, and that gap between an old approval and newer, more targeted research is exactly the space an ingredient like this one lives in. There's a second study worth knowing too. Research published in the journal Diabetologia in 2012 found that carrageenan exposure led to glucose intolerance and insulin resistance in both mouse liver tissue and human liver cells in a lab setting. Again, that's not a clinical trial of people drinking this carton every morning, but it's a real, tested, published mechanism tying the same additive to blood sugar regulation. It's also fortified with vitamin D2, the plant-based form typically used in fortified foods rather than D3, and the flavored versions carry noticeably more added sugar than the plain, unsweetened one, which is worth checking against whatever else is already on the day's plate. And underneath all of it, coconut cream sits well down a short ingredient list behind water and 2 or 3 stabilizers, which is a different problem than a contaminated can, but it's still not what most people picture when they read coconut milk on the front of a carton that's mostly water and gum. One quick note before the next 4, because they get more serious, not less. A quick like helps this reach more people who are about to walk down their own pantry aisle with slightly different eyes. No subscribe ask, nothing else attached to it, just that, and then straight back to the list. Number 5, So Delicious Coconut Milk. Same 2 thickeners as silk, gellan gum, and locust bean gum, plus natural flavors on the ingredient line. A phrase that sounds specific and isn't. Under FDA labeling rules, natural flavors is a legal catch-all. A company has to certify the flavoring originated from a natural source, but doesn't have to break out every compound bundled inside that phrase. That's not an accusation that anything dangerous is specifically hiding in this carton. It's just a description of how little that phrase actually discloses, here or on any other label carrying it. That loophole isn't specific to coconut milk either. It's one of the most commonly flagged phrases in food labeling across the entire grocery store, precisely because it's legal, common, and tells a shopper almost nothing beyond, "Trust us." So Delicious also carries carrageenan in some of its formulations, the same additive flagged one spot ago, tied in that 2007 study to gut inflammation, and in the 2012 diabetologia research to glucose intolerance and insulin resistance under lab conditions. It's also one of 3 brands on this list, alongside Native Forest and the Whole Foods store brand still to come, that lists guar gum. Guar gum is a soluble fiber, and soluble fiber has its own documented interaction worth knowing if it applies. A 1996 study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that increased dietary fiber intake could measurably reduce the absorption of levothyroxine, the most commonly prescribed thyroid medication in the country, in hypothyroid patients. That original research was done with wheat bran specifically, not guar gum by name, and it didn't land on one fixed percentage, but the underlying mechanism is fiber binding to the medication in the gut before it fully absorbs, and that mechanism doesn't care which fiber source it came from. If a thyroid prescription is part of the morning routine, that's 2 minutes with a pharmacist well spent, not a reason to swear off coconut milk entirely. Number 4, Chaokoh coconut milk. This is where the concerns stop being only about ingredient panels. In 2020, PETA Asia investigators visited coconut farms across Thailand, including a farm supplying Chaokoh's producer, Thepadungporn Coconut Company, and documented young macaque monkeys kept chained, put through abusive training, and forced to climb and pick coconuts for hours at a stretch. PETA's own reporting put a number on it. A trained monkey can be forced to pick up to 1,600 coconuts in a single day, compared to roughly 80 for a human picker doing the same work by hand. It's also worth being clear about scope here. This wasn't a single farm anomaly. Investigators documented the practice across 8 farms in the region, which is part of why what happened next moved as fast and as broadly as it did. On October 30th, 2020, Costco pulled Chaokoh coconut milk from its shelves, following Walgreens, Food Lion, Giant Food, Stop & Shop, and Target, all of which had already dropped Thai coconut products connected to the investigation. That isn't a rumor circulating online. That's 6 major U.S. retailers making a purchasing decision based on a documented supply chain investigation, confirmed on both sides. The investigation is also older news to some shoppers than it probably should be. Plenty of people heard about it back in 2020, assumed it got fixed somewhere along the way, and went back to buying whatever was cheapest on the shelf a year or 2 later. There's no confirmed, independent follow-up testing showing the practice has been fully eliminated industry-wide since the original reporting, which is part of why this brand still sits this high on the list, rather than getting treated as old, resolved news. And separately from all of that, Chaokoh also showed up on the 2016 BPA can lining study, the same one that flagged Goya and Thai Kitchen. So setting the labor question aside entirely for a moment, the can itself still carries the same plasticizer migration issue as the brands already covered. 3 separate issues, 3 separate sources, 1 can. Number 3. Native Forest Coconut Milk, the standard can. Not the one at the very end of this list, which is a different product from the same company and earns a very different verdict. Native Forest markets its cans as BPA-free, and as far as that specific claim goes, it appears to hold up. This brand doesn't show up in the BPA testing that flagged Goya, Thai Kitchen, and Chaokoh, but BPA-free is a claim about exactly one chemical. It says nothing about what replaced it. The plastics and can lining industry has spent the last decade swapping BPA for chemical cousins with names like BPS and BPF, marketed as the safer alternative largely because BPA-free sells, and regulatory testing for those replacement compounds still lags well behind the testing built up around BPA itself over decades. No independent lab result naming bisphenol S specifically in this can has been confirmed here, so that isn't the claim being made. The claim is narrower and still worth knowing. A can that's honestly BPA-free hasn't necessarily been cleared of everything else in that same chemical family, and BPA-free printed on a label is doing more marketing work than science work, if that's the only question being asked of it. This is a pattern that shows up anytime an industry gets caught with one specific chemical. The response is rarely stop using anything like it, it's switch to the version that hasn't been studied as thoroughly yet, and market the switch itself as the fix. The standard can also list squar gum, the same fiber additive tied earlier to reduced levothyroxine absorption in that 1996 research. If thyroid medication is part of the routine, this is a second brand where that's worth 2 minutes of thought. And its sibling product further down this list was built specifically to answer both of these points, which is exactly why it earns a completely different spot later. Number 2, 365 by Whole Foods Coconut Milk, the standard non-organic can. The store brand Halo does a lot of work here that the ingredient panel doesn't back up. Strip away the Whole Foods name and the standard can lists guar gum, same as Native Forest and So Delicious, meaning the same fiber and thyroid medication consideration from earlier in this list applies here too. There's nothing in the researched record that meaningfully separates this can from the cheaper, less trusted-looking cans already covered. The ingredient doing the thickening work is the same additive family, just wearing a store's private label trust on top of it. Whole Foods does sell an organic version of this same product line, and organic status changes what's allowed in the farming, not necessarily what's allowed in a can lining or a thickener blend, which is worth checking on the actual panel rather than assuming the organic sticker answers every question already covered on this list. That's really the entire case against the standard 365 can. Not a unique contamination finding, not a unique lab result. Just the observation that Whole Foods printed on the front doesn't mean the can behind it was built any differently than the ones people specifically buy this brand to avoid. None of that makes 365 unusually bad. It makes it unusually average while being marketed as though it isn't. Which, across an entire shopping cart full of decisions made partly on trust in a store's name, adds up to something worth knowing before checkout rather than after. Number 1, Trader Joe's Coconut Cream. Before getting into why this one tops the list, one popular claim about it needs to be corrected, because it's been repeated widely enough online that it deserves setting straight on the record. The claim going around that Trader Joe's coconut products contain potassium metabisulfite, a sulfite preservative, doesn't hold up. Checking the actual ingredient records for Trader Joe's coconut cream, the organic version lists exactly 2 ingredients, organic coconut and water, nothing else. The non-organic version lists coconut, water, sodium carboxymethylcellulose, and xanthan gum. Neither one lists a sulfite of any kind. That accusation appears to have gotten attached to this brand somewhere along the way by mistake, and it deserves to be dropped rather than repeated one more time. Once one confidently written source states a claim like that, it tends to get copied into dozens of other lists, videos, and comment threads without anyone going back to recheck the primary ingredient record. And that's very likely exactly what happened here. A specific, alarming-sounding chemical name, repeated often enough across enough places that it started sounding verified, without anyone actually appearing to open the label and look. Here's what does hold up. That non-organic can, the one most people actually reach for, the one without organic printed anywhere on the label, isn't simply coconut and water the way the cult reputation around this brand suggests. It's coconut, water, and 2 stabilizers, sodium carboxymethylcellulose and xanthan gum, both common, both generally recognized as safe, but both a step away from the two-ingredient simplicity this brand is known for online. And the can itself hasn't been cleared of the same concern raised 9 times already on this list. Trader Joe's was one of the 4 brands named in that 2016 BPA can lining study, right alongside Goya, Thai Kitchen, and Chaokoh. So the actual case against the #1 brand on this list isn't the internet's favorite sulfite rumor. It's a can that tests the same as the cheapest option on this entire list, wrapped around a product that isn't quite as simple as its reputation, sold to people who bought it specifically because they trusted that reputation. 9 brands down. 2 left, the ones that actually hold up once the can is opened and the ingredient panel is read all the way through, not just the front label. The first safe pick, Native Forest Organic Simple Coconut Milk. This is not the same product as the standard Native Forest can covered a few minutes ago. Same company, completely different formula, built specifically to fix what the standard version gets wrong. The ingredient list is exactly 2 items, organic coconut and water, no gar gum, no polysorbate, no locust bean gum, no carrageenan, no natural flavors doing undisclosed work. The company publishes third-party testing showing its cans are both BPA-free and BPS-free, which matters specifically because of the bisphenol swap concern raised with the standard can a few minutes ago, and this is a case where that testing is actually documented rather than assumed. It's USDA Organic Certified and Non-GMO Project Verified, and it runs somewhere around $4 to $5 a can, more than the bottom of this list, but not dramatically more. If the standard Native Forest can was the version built around what a factory needed for shelf stability, this is the version built around what's actually printed on the ingredient list, coconut and water, and nothing standing in for anything else. It's also proof that the same company capable of putting out a can worth avoiding is equally capable of putting out one worth buying, which suggests the real difference on this entire list usually isn't the brand name at all. It's the specific can in the specific hand. 2 cans on this list share the exact same logo, sit on the exact same shelf, and land in completely different places in this ranking, which is as good a reason as any to stop shopping by brand loyalty and start shopping by the ingredient panel every single time, even for a brand already trusted. The top safe pick, aroy-d pure coconut milk, sold in a shelf-stable Tetra Pak carton instead of a can. That packaging choice solves the entire can lining question at the source. There's no metal, no epoxy resin, no plastic lining to leach anything into the fat over months sitting on a shelf, because the format that caused the problem for 9 brands on this list simply isn't part of the equation here. The ingredient list is 2 items, coconut extract and water. No gums, no stabilizers, no sulfites, no carrageenan, nothing tucked under a natural flavors umbrella. It runs around $3 a carton, it's carried at H-Mart and most Asian grocery stores, and once it's opened, it reseals and keeps in the refrigerator for the rest of the carton. One honest caveat, worth saying plainly rather than skipping past. Aroy-d sources its coconuts from Thailand, the same country at the center of the labor investigation covered earlier on this list. That PETA investigation wasn't a single company finding. It covered farms across the Thai coconut industry broadly, and there's no independent brand-specific clearance statement confirming aroy-d's supply chain sits entirely outside of that picture. An ingredient panel this clean doesn't automatically answer a sourcing question that clean. If the labor issue matters as much as the chemical one, it's worth checking this brand's current sourcing statement directly, rather than assuming a 2-ingredient label settles every part of it. A clean ingredient panel and an ethical supply chain are 2 different report cards, and the honest version of this recommendation is that this can pass as the first one clearly, and the second one is still an open question worth a shopper's own 5 minutes of research, not a settled fact either way. 9 cans, 2 real winners, and 1 theme running underneath every single entry on this list. The front of the package and the truth of what's inside it rarely finish the same sentence. A can that says natural can still be lined with a plasticizer that's been leaching into the fat for months. A brand with a cult following online can still be one stabilizer away from the 2-ingredient simplicity people assume they're buying. And a company capable of putting one deeply flawed product on a shelf can also be the same company putting the cleanest product on this entire list 2 aisles over. Even the internet's own reporting on all of this turned out to need a correction, because the loudest, most repeated claim about the single most popular can on this entire list was pointed at the wrong ingredient the whole time, and it still took this deep a look to catch it. The habit that actually changes anything isn't memorizing 9 brand names. It's turning the can around before it goes in the cart, every single time, and reading past the front label to the actual ingredient panel underneath it, because that's the only part of the packaging that isn't trying to sell anything. Drop a comment. With what's currently sitting in the pantry right now, there's a decent chance it's on this list somewhere, and it's a lot better to find that out here than after the can's already open.